The mansion had been abandoned for decades, but everyone in town knew the legends. Built by a 19th century eccentric, rumors claimed he had made a pact with something dark, trapping the souls of the innocent in a labyrinthine maze of mirrors in his basement. Locals spoke of the maze as a place of unimaginable horror, where one's darkest secrets and twisted desires came to life in ghastly reflections. Those who entered either never returned or came back, changed. Jordan, a paranormal enthusiast, had heard enough stories to be intrigued. He gathered his friends, Ava, Kyle, and Rachel, for an exploration of the fabled mirror maze. "This is going to be the kind of night people remember," Jordan boasted as they stood outside the crumbling mansion. But as they crossed the threshold, an unnatural cold washed over them, and Jordan's confidence wavered. "Let's stick together," he muttered. "This place is way creepier than I thought." Descending into the basement, they found the entrance to the mirror maze. The dim light from their flashlights barely cut through the inky blackness that seemed to cling to the mirrors. Shadows morphed and shifted as they moved deeper into the maze, where each corridor led to more endless reflections. Soon, Rachel felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. She caught a glimpse of her reflection, but something was wrong. The reflection was staring at her with hollow, bloodshot eyes and a grotesque grin, the lips stretched too wide as though torn open. "Guys, my reflection just moved on its own," she whispered, fear clawing at her voice. "Oh, don't be ridiculous," Kyle chuckled, but even he looked uneasy. The maze wasn't just made of mirrors. As they walked, they realized that certain patches of glass were covered in what looked like faint, bloody handprints smeared across the surface. Ava paused to inspect one of them, but when she touched it, the blood spread like a fresh wound across the glass, seeping through the cracks as though the mirror itself was alive. Her flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows as the blood dripped down, staining the floor. Ava stumbled back, her breath coming in short gasps. "This isn't just some stupid haunted house," she whispered. "There's something alive in here." Then came a voice, cold and whispering, from somewhere deep within the maze. "Feed us!" Jordan froze. "Did you guys hear that?" The voice returned, louder this time. "Give us your flesh!" A grotesque reflection of Ava appeared in a mirror beside her, and as she looked closer, the reflection's skin began to peel back in thick, bloody sheets, exposing raw muscle and sinew underneath. Suddenly, their reflections began to mimic their worst traits in disturbing ways. Kyle's reflection grinned with jagged teeth, his eyes black pits oozing blood as he whispered, "I'll be your worst nightmare, Kyle. I know every fear, every sin." One by one, each of them was haunted by their doppelgangers, who taunted them with painful truths. Ava's reflection hissed, "You never wanted to come here, did you? Just waiting for a reason to abandon them all, as you always do." As they tried to flee, the mirrors shifted, creating a maze that led them back to their reflections, no matter which direction they ran. The reflections became more disturbing, peeling back layers of skin, their flesh twisting and distorting into unrecognizable horrors. Blood pooled and trickled through cracks in the mirrors, dripping to the floor. Rachel began to cry, and her reflection laughed. "The only way out is through me," it whispered, pressing a hand against the glass. Rachel felt her own hand begin to burn as a red welt appeared, mirroring her reflection's gesture. "Rachel!" Jordan screamed. But as he reached for her, he realized that his reflection too was pressing against the glass with a wicked grin, ready to pull him in. The maze wasn't merely haunted, it was a sentient, malevolent force that demanded sacrifice. The reflections continued to torment them, revealing secrets and twisted desires they had hidden from each other, taunting them to the breaking point. Ava, in a fit of desperation, pounded her fists against a mirror, shouting, "What do you want from us?" Her reflection leered, "Blood." In an instant, the mirrors shattered, fragments slicing through the air. A shard embedded itself in Ava's arm, cutting deep. But when she tried to pull it out, her hand was stuck, her reflection laughing from within the mirror, pulling her arm deeper into the glass like quicksand. "Help!" she screamed as her hand was pulled further in. Blood smeared the glass as her arm vanished inch by inch until her reflection reached out and dragged her fully into the mirror, her screams echoing as she disappeared, leaving only bloody handprints on the glass. Horrified, Jordan, Kyle, and Rachel realized that the maze demanded a flesh offering to let anyone escape. The reflections were vessels of past victims, cursed to drag others into the mirror world for eternity. "I'm not going to die here," Kyle shouted, shoving past Jordan. But the maze twisted again, blocking his path with more mirrors. Kyle's reflection appeared in every direction, laughing hysterically as blood poured from its mouth. "Run all you want, Kyle," it taunted, "but there's no way out." Desperate, Kyle grabbed a shard of broken mirror and slashed at the reflection. But as he did, his own throat burst open, blood spraying across the glass. His reflection mirrored the movement, grinning as it bled out, dragging Kyle's lifeless body into the glass, leaving nothing but a bloodstain on the floor. Only Jordan and Rachel were left. The walls of the maze seemed to pulse, dripping with blood and flesh, a grotesque parody of life. Everywhere they turned, the mirrors mocked them, whispering promises of freedom if they'd just give in. Jordan turned to Rachel, desperation in his eyes. "One of us has to stay behind. It's the only way out." Rachel backed away, horrified. You're suggesting I stay? We don't have a choice, Rachel. It's either one of us or both of us." As Jordan moved closer, Rachel felt her own survival instincts kick in. She grabbed a shard from the ground and slashed at him, shouting, "I won't die here!" But as the blade made contact, she felt her own flesh rip, blood pouring from a wound that had appeared on her own body. She screamed, realizing that the maze mirrored every violent act, every betrayal. As Rachel lay dying, the maze revealed its final, horrifying truth. Her reflection morphed into someone familiar, her own mother. She realized, with chilling clarity, that her family had been bound to this cursed place for generations, each one pulled in and trapped by the mirrors. "You were chosen, Rachel," the reflection whispered, smiling with blood-stained teeth. "A family sacrifice. It's the only way to keep the curse at bay." With her last breath, Rachel watched as her body was absorbed into the mirror, her image forever trapped in the glass, screaming silently. As Jordan stumbled out, the maze sealing itself behind him, he realized he had inherited the curse, doomed to lure others into the maze to feed the mirror's endless hunger. Jordan's hands trembled as he traced the instructions written in spidery ink on an ancient parchment, the letters smudged and reeking of mildew. He had spent weeks tracking down every person who had ever survived the mirror maze, each one a ghost of themselves, hollow-eyed, mumbling warnings to never look back. But no one had answers. No one but the old man in the shack outside of town, a recluse who had sold Jordan this piece of cursed parchment with the instructions to sever the maze's hold on his soul. The ritual was simple, but the cost was steep. He needed another person to offer to the maze in his place. Jordan's reflection in the cracked mirror he'd set up for the ritual sneered back at him. Dark, swirling eyes glittered with a hunger that he recognized but could not explain. It was as though the maze itself was alive, pulsing with malice, waiting for him to complete the deal. "Do you really think you can free yourself?" his reflection taunted, mouth twisting into a cruel grin. "Once marked, you're one of us. We are part of you now." He shook his head, his heart hammering. "This ends tonight," he whispered, more to himself than to the mocking apparition in the mirror. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was his sister Emily who had come into town to check on him. Jordan's stomach twisted as he realized she was the easiest option, the person he could lead to the mirror maze without much explanation. She'd follow him, worried and trusting, completely unaware of the horror awaiting her. He swallowed hard, trying to shake the guilt from his mind. "It's either her or me," he thought, wrestling with the despair and fear clawing at his insides. "One last sacrifice and I'm free." When Emily arrived, she barely had time to hug him before Jordan's grip tightened, leading her toward the edge of the town where the abandoned mansion loomed. As they entered, Emily's face twisted with unease. "Jordan, why did you bring me here?" He forced a smile. "Trust me, I need to show you something." Her brow furrowed. "This place is wrong." She glanced around, shivering. "It's colder than outside. Are you sure about this?" Jordan's mouth went dry. He could barely look at her, every nerve screaming for him to abandon the plan and flee. But the maze's mark itched, burning like fire across his wrist, pushing him forward. His vision blurred and he felt his reflection grin in the corners of every darkened glass. He wasn't sure who was in control, him or the maze's curse. "Come on, it's just through here," he muttered, leading her toward the room with the ancient, tarnished mirror, its frame carved with writhing figures that seemed to move in the dim light. Emily hesitated, her hand slipping from his. "Jordan, I think we should leave." He bit down on his lip, summoning every ounce of resolve. It's the only way I can explain everything," he whispered. The lie tasted bitter, but he forced himself to continue. "Just trust me." She took a shaky breath, eyes full of uncertainty, before nodding and stepping closer to the mirror. "What now?" But before he could answer, the mirror began to ripple, pulling her reflection closer, distorting her face into something twisted, a mockery of her real self. Emily screamed, eyes wide in terror as she watched herself transform, her reflection showing her mouth widening, teeth sharpening, eyes hollow and dark. "Jordan! What is this?" she shrieked, trying to pull away, but the mirror had begun to emit an invisible force, drawing her in as though it had become a gaping, hungry maw. I'm so sorry," he whispered, voice trembling. But even as he felt his own horror, he couldn't look away. His reflection beside her sneered, delighted, as though Jordan's torment was the true sacrifice. Emily clawed at the glass, her hands leaving bloody streaks as she fought to resist. "Jordan, please," she sobbed, terror and betrayal in her eyes. "Don't do this, help me!" But something twisted inside him, something dark and remorseless. The maze's curse, a part of him now. He reached out, placing his hand against hers on the glass. With that touch, her fate was sealed, and her body jerked as the mirror claimed her, pulling her deeper with a sickening squelch. Her mouth opened in a silent scream as her skin stretched, warped, absorbed into the mirror until she vanished. The mirror stilled, leaving only a faint smudge of blood as a reminder that she had ever existed. For a moment, there was only silence. The weight of what he'd done crushed him, but the mark on his wrist faded, cooling, its lines softening like a fading bruise. He'd paid the price. He was free, or so he thought. As he turned to leave, he felt a chill behind him. The mirror's surface rippled again, and he glanced back, dread twisting in his gut. There, in the mirror, stood Emily, but not the sister he remembered. Her eyes were dark, hollow, and filled with hatred. She stared at him, her face smeared with blood, her mouth stretching in a furious, silent scream. "Jordan!" her voice echoed, though her lips did not move. "You'll never be free." The mark on his wrist flared to life again, searing his flesh. He screamed, clutching his arm, as Emily's figure leaned closer, pressing her bloodied hand against the glass. Her eyes glittered with something dark and ancient, something that belonged to the maze. "Now," she whispered, her voice dripping with malice, "it's your turn." The reflection laughed, and he saw his own face merging with hers, becoming part of the maze, bound to it for eternity. And as the last light faded from the room, the mirror claimed another soul. Think twice before you look away, or the maze might just find you. If you made it out alive, hit like, share, and subscribe. But remember, in this story, it's never over. More chilling tales await. Join us if you dare.